Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hey, lovely radicals. What's happening? Are you feeling okay? This one's tough for me to record. And it's going to be a tough one also to release. Because, well, I told you that I was looking into higher levels of treatment, right? Because I realized that what I was doing, namely collecting incredibly valuable information about eating disorders, internalized fat phobia, intuitive eating, and self-acceptance, that was, of course, extremely satisfying and interesting. And it was also very gratifying to be able to witness our growing community that seems so hungry for this kind of information, just as I am myself. And as I said, that was all very, very gratifying. The past 1.5 years, me doing the podcast, it was amazing. The beautiful community we've built on Facebook called Life Unrestricted. I mean, what a wonderful space. What incredibly warm-hearted people. How much loving support and compassion there is to witness on a daily basis. That's just something else. So, in the past 1.5 years, I learned a shit ton about eating disorders, weight science, the fallacy of dieting, and I was so happy to share all that I learned from the experts and specialists that I had on my show that I overlooked the elephant in the room. For some reason, gathering all that knowledge and seeing that my podcast reached so many people put an incredible amount of pressure on myself. My inner gremlin told me that I was a fraud for not getting ahead faster with recovery and for being a laughable example of someone trying to recover, especially in the light of all the valuable info that I now knew. And you know, it's not that I ever doubted a thing my guests said. No, it all makes perfect sense. Recovery and steps towards any sort of recovery, those make perfect sense. And in case you're wondering what I'm talking about, please go listen to all the past over 60 episodes that I recorded because, you know, the guests were simply amazing. The elephant in the room, though, that I'm talking about is the simple fact that I was relapsing instead of recovering. The more stories of recovery I heard, the better knowledgeable I became, the more I wanted to be the best example, you know, the less I was able to do it. It was as if there was this incredible pressure mounting in me, you know, that this should be enough for me to take more steps towards recovery. And the more pressure there was, the more I slipped. So instead of focusing on my own recovery, I lost myself in the work for the podcast, always being involved in the preparation for interviews, in the editing, in the producing, in the book reading, always immersed in the topic. Totally on this mission to help as many people as possible and to spread the word of all the amazing guests I was able to talk to. And that sounds nice, but ironically, all that became my very stumbling block. Instead of focusing on finding out who I was outside of my eating disorder, instead of finding people in real life to connect to, and instead of living life and pursuing recovery, I was kind of digging myself into the mountain of work there is to produce a weekly podcast, and so I isolated more. And that, of course, made my eating disorder stronger again. And as it goes, the more I isolated, the less I somehow felt able to actually break out of the isolation again, because I didn't feel worthy anymore. Somehow my rules and compulsions had gotten too loud again, and there was nobody there to catch that in real life. That's why eating disorders are so dangerous. They lure you back in any way they can. And honestly, I somehow managed to overlook how impossibly small my life had gotten again. Because at least I had my podcast, right? And especially because, as I said in the early episodes, I was doing pretty well in the beginning. So I figured, yeah, I'm taking steps ahead. And I tried cutting down exercise time. I tried eating more during the day. I signed up for an improv course. I tried meeting people for coffee. I went to meditation class and mindfulness. And there came a point when I had to realize the courses had ended and I didn't go back. I didn't sign up for new classes. I started turning down invitations again, because they somehow interfered with my exercise and food rules. Then the coffee sessions became a rare occurrence once more. And as I said before, the isolation just grew and grew. And I kind of dug myself into the hole of the work for the podcast. So my exercise compulsion was through the roof again, and my general anxiety and depression got a lot worse again. And my head was screaming rules and shoulds at me again all day. And a few weeks ago, my therapist, who's not an eating disorder specialist, by the way, but a trauma therapist, she pointed out to me that I started to look and behave like a caged animal again. And man, I simply wasn't aware of how much my ED voice was increasingly ruling my life again. Because, heck, this couldn't be true, right? Here I am dishing out advice, talking about recovery, and I am myself relapsing? I just couldn't admit it for myself or even realize that that's what was happening. And yet that's exactly what happened. And when I realized it, how embarrassing. How shameful, right? My inner gremlin was howling at me, laughing, telling me how awful this would be for my credibility, how everybody would laugh at my failure, and just generally what a fuck up I obviously am. So I reached out to people in the community that I knew would have a more objective view about what was going on with me, and I realized that this could actually be progress for me. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Because, it was progress that I wasn't keeping it all to myself as I would have in the years before. And who knows, maybe one true success that I have to show for myself is that my trauma therapy must have worked, in the sense that I finally came to a point where I saw that I, myself, was worthy of more support too. That there was no way that I could battle this demon here by myself without eating disorder treatment, without family, or without any social net. Of course, I couldn't make more recovery progress on my own. In the isolation that I've been experiencing, the eating disorder basically reinforced itself. And it made it look like the more I isolated I got, the more I needed the eating disorder behaviors. In my case, over-exercising and restricting during the day and binging every night. So finally, there was this point where I gathered all my courage and I told my therapist that our sessions alone just didn't cut it. That my ED voice in my head was just not faced much by our trauma therapy, and that I felt like I needed more support to break those behaviors and habits that basically have been in place for years and years and years. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you all this to let you know that sometimes knowing all the right things, intellectually getting all that you're hearing and understanding the whole conundrum, that might just not be enough to bring about change. because change only comes from changing things, right? Actually behaviorally changing things. And I heard this so many times on my podcast that one would think, hey, by now Merit must be totally badassing this recovery thing. But what actually happened was something completely unexpected. Somehow, as I said, this whole mountain of knowledge that I gathered created this huge pressure. Imagine my inner gremlin going, look at you. You should be further in your journey by now, you know. Don't you think you owe it to your listeners and yourself to not just talk, but do stuff differently? Don't you think you're the most laughable example of recovery failure? What a disgrace. Now, mind you, little me over here wasn't really aware of all these thought processes going on, but since my symptoms got worse and I had to face this fact, which was incomprehensible for me really, as I said, I suddenly saw that maybe having all this knowledge and putting myself under so much pressure, thinking that I should be fast-tracking this recovery with all of what I now know, and that I had no excuses, not to make the necessary changes. Well, all this pressure seems to have had the opposite effect. And I realized this only in the past few months, and I couldn't make sense of it all. And I felt crippled with shame. Now that, of course, didn't help things either, considering that I'm alone with my thoughts day in, day out, and basically putting myself down for not doing better. Of course, that doesn't help. And we know what happens when our inner gremlin thoughts or our eating disorder thoughts are driving the shame bus again, right? The power goes to the eating disorder and not me. I was internally disempowering myself while I was trying to help others by producing this podcast. But you know what? There is progress in all this. Because had you told me a year ago that there would ever be a time when I would consider higher levels of treatment at the ripe age of 44, and that I would even consider residential treatment, I would have laughed and resisted the sheer idea of that. Yet, all these conversations did help in a way. Because what we heard in all these conversations on Life Unrestricted, what we heard over and over again was the fact that we cannot do this alone. And that no matter where we are in our individual processes, that we are always worthy of support. And that it is always okay to ask for help. And it seems like those facts slowly trickled down into my old brain, and I was able to become aware of what my thought processes looked like. Namely, as I said, now that I have all this knowledge, I gotta be able to do this myself. And meanwhile, my eating disorder voice was having a field day and led me into a shame spiral, which created a worsening of my behaviors. So many words to say, yes, I've come to a point where I allow myself to admit that, quote unquote, even I need more support. That who would have thought even I deserve to get help? Not just all the others, but me too. And that means you too, in case you need it. It feels awful for me to admit it, because my perfectionistic mind, of course, wants me to be a perfect recovery example. But hey, I'm not. And the simple fact of actually looking for higher levels of care for myself is in itself progress. A tiny step, considering that, it's only the first step, but an infinitely important one. One that was never in the realm of possibility in my own stubborn head before. And again, why do you think I'm telling you all this? It's not because it makes me feel better. It's because I truly hope that by me sharing this, there's the possibility of this reaching someone who actually needs to hear this. Because A, it shows how effing hard to beat eating disorders are. And B, if you are finding yourself in the exact same position as I am, maybe also having been in the eating disorder behaviors for years or decades like me, then just let me tell you, lovely soul, you are worthy of support, of asking for more help. I mean, as I said, despite having heard so many experts on my show, despite all those amazing guests tell me that it's impossible to beat this alone, I somehow, for a long, long time, had this magical thinking going on that me getting all the necessary info would somehow be enough to get me out of this mess. Not seeing that, yes, me too, would need some sort of social net, more people on board, some other structure than the well-rehearsed and very entrenched eating disorder structure that I had going on here. That me too needed a higher level of care, a treatment team to help me how to dismantle the dysfunctional structure, if you will. So what I am uncovering here is this age-old belief that many of us have, I certainly do, that says, I cannot be a burden to people. And I think that's part of what kept me from asking for help, because it goes head to head against my fear of being, quote unquote, too burdensome to people. So now that this is said, what did I actually do? Man, after I realized all that, I had nothing but questions and noise in my head. What? Where? How? What now? So what I did is I went to an info afternoon at a treatment facility in another part of the country in a very rural setting to just go and have a look. And that alone was scary. I was a bundle of nerves for days before I even got to that info thing. I was a mess. I was so afraid. I didn't feel afraid as in, I'm so scared. No, but I just noticed it. My body was so tense. I bit my nails. I didn't sleep. I felt anxious and stressed and irritated and, all these signs that something was going on inside of me. And that was fear. And there I sat in this room where they introduced their facility and their work, and I found myself in the exact position that I had feared so much. Being by far the oldest person in the room, being surrounded by young teens. Actually, the whole house seemed filled with them, and they all looked like ghosts to me, so fragile, so emaciated. And guess what my eating disorder voice told me? The obvious, right? You're not sick enough to be here. Look at you. You don't even look sick. You're twice their size, and you're twice their age. You don't fit in here. And when I heard many of these young women share that this was their 5th or 6th or even 7th or 8th time at a treatment facility, I found myself thinking judgy thoughts like, what? Isn't one stay supposed to do the trick? I wouldn't want to have to do this twice. Why are they not recovering? I wasn't just judging them, but also, again, I was setting the bar impossibly high for myself. One time needs to do the trick, right? Everything else would be a failure. That's what we do in our head, right? The rules are different for us. We must do better. We must do these things perfectly. Everything else would mean failing. Well, I was in for a lesson, let me tell you. In my one-on-one talk that I had scheduled with the residential psychiatrist there, to find out if this facility would be a right fit for me, I was taken aback of how, quote unquote, discouraging I found what she said. Because what she said was, well, I see that you're clearly living in pretty hellish eating disorder circumstances, and who knows, if we're lucky, you're able to make minor changes after a possible stay at our facility. And I looked at her, probably with a pretty puzzled look in my eyes, and in my head I thought, what are you talking about? Minor changes? That's not what I'm coming here for. I'm coming here to be fixed. And she totally caught me and said, Look, you've been doing what you've been doing for over 20 years, and we cannot change all that in a few months. The risk of relapse is always high with all the patients. And all we can do is making small steps and to work on making those last, If you expect yourself to jump from black to white, I can guarantee you are setting yourself up for failure. Lasting change takes time, and it takes a lot to reprogram a brain that has been used to dysfunctional thoughts and behavior patterns for an entire life. Oh, I didn't want to hear all that. What I wanted to hear was that if I muster up the courage to go there, I could at least expect to be fixed, right? No such luck. And that sucked. But then when I talked about that with my therapist, she even doubled down and said, look, Merit, there's a reason why people often go back to treatment many times. On your journey, going there is a considerable step. But don't forget, it's only one more step towards recovery. Recovery is a day-to-day thing. It is life. And whatever small changes you will be able to make stick, that's a success. And you might learn to make some of those there, and then we'll see how it goes to, implement those when you're out of the treatment. You might find it comparably easy to stick to the new rules there at the facility, but back home, that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's going to be tough. Again, not what I wanted to hear. But hey, it's a step. And so from now on, I'll basically be flying blind. And by the way, there were 2 other things I didn't want to hear when I was at the treatment facility to have a look. Number 1, internet time there at the facility is strictly limited to 1 hour a day. Number 2, I will have to give up doing podcast interviews because they want me to fully focus on my own healing. And I wouldn't even have the necessary internet access to continue interviewing people and engage on social media as much as I have in my group and everything. And all that almost turned into a stumbling block for me. No way I can give that up. I have 11 episodes already recorded and 25 interviews are scheduled. Are you kidding me? But no, they were not kidding. And it just doesn't fly there, You have no idea how hard it was for me to even get my head around the fact that I would have to write to all these brilliant guests that I had planned interviews with, that I was so looking forward to also, that I would have to cancel all those dates. It felt so wrong. It felt so much like failing. But I had to make a decision. Was I going to go to treatment and take care of myself, or was I going to be a quote-unquote good girl to just keep the world happy? I chose myself. And boy, it was so terrible to cancel all the planned interviews, but I did it, and I didn't reschedule either, because who knows what lies ahead. And even though it feels very, very weird to go to treatment where most women are literally half my age and half my size, and even though the thought that I'm not sick enough is very loud, I'm going to go. So, what's happening now, you might ask? Maybe you think that I have been rambling and that you think this is boring. I hope it's not, but here's my plan. I'm going to record all the intros to the conversations that I have already recorded, and I'm going to pre-schedule the release of those. Because I can't not release them. The guests were gems, and you deserve to hear those conversations, no doubt. But since I will have very sketchy internet access, as I said, I cannot promise when those episodes will drop. maybe every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I have no idea how it'll work out, but I will somehow bring them to you. I know that I have to abide by the very strict rules at the facility, but I will release an episode when I can. Maybe on the weekends when I go home, we'll see. As I said, please know that those will be pre-recorded, and I won't be able to respond regularly on social media anymore because I really need time for myself now. And it would really be wrong for me to commit to anything but trying my best to bring you what I have. And once those existing conversations are all out and released, we'll see what happens. I can only hope for your understanding. And as for our wonderful, warm, and generally phenomenal community called Life Unrestricted on Facebook, I have found great people who will run the group for me in my absence, and I will post the names of the admins and moderators in the group too. But just know there are people like Summer Innanen, who hosts the Fearless Rebel Radio podcast, Sarah Vance, who hosts the Reclaiming You podcast, Jessie Haggerty, who hosts the Body Love Project podcast, people like, Jennifer Rowland, the awesome eating disorder therapist, Tracy Brown, who is an intuitive eating counselor and eating disorder specialist, and many others. There are so many people who were willing, to say yes and say, Merit, please take that step back. And of course, we're going to keep, that space you created safe and keep it interesting and post stuff. And so please know that you're in the best hands. And of course, when I get a chance, I will check in and say hi or maybe give an update. Who knows? But again, I don't know about the internet access and I don't want to make any false promises. I won't be able to respond to messages and comments everywhere as I used to, and I hope you can accept that. As I said, there are great people taking my place, and I'm super happy about that. That gives me all the freedom to just jump in and say something when I can and feel like it without it, feeling like a responsibility. That would be messing with my head. I know that. And I know that I have to focus on myself now instead of all the others, as I, usually do. So what's the core message of this episode? Why does this matter? It matters because, you see, if I can take such a giant leap and leave my podcast and my community behind, all those things that I was so passionately involved in, the work that I so love doing for all of us, then you can too. What matters is your well-being, lovely one, and getting all the help you need whenever you need it. That's not just okay, but it's the best example you can set for someone else. That's what I'm trying to bring across here. It's not really about my story, but, about the general message. I hate giving up control. I hate uncertainty. I hate not having a single clue as to where I'm headed here. But that's what's ahead. Uncertainty, giving up control and not having a single clue. And I think that might just be the first step towards freedom. Because, look, I just really want to be able to dance before this party is over, metaphorically speaking. You know what I mean? And speaking of support, let me just give a last shout out to those of you who are supporting me on Patreon. You're amazing. Thank you for all of you who have become supporters of this show. It means everything. You are all part of why this message finds its way out. This week, I want to give this huge last shout out, personal shout out to Carrie and Miriam and Lita and Ellen and Selena and Shannon. Thank you. Thank you for having pledged a contribution. I'm so grateful. As I said, this is the last time that I can give a shout out for people who contribute because, as I said, from now on you will hear episodes and intros that are pre-recorded so that I can bring them to you. So, I won't be able to mention any names, but please know if you're still willing to, become a Patreon of this show, you're amazing. Thank you. you can check out my page on patreon.com. That's patreon.com/life_unrestricted. Just know that you're amazing. And without you, the past 1.5 years wouldn't have happened. Thank you. So, what am I going to say now? I suck at goodbye. So I'm not going to say goodbye. I'm just going to say, hey, you'll be hearing from me, because I have quite a few episodes up my sleeve, and you're going to love them. And yeah, I'll be checking in here and there on Facebook when I can. And just know that whatever happens, please take care of yourself. You are worthy of all the great stuff in life. And whatever you need, ask for it, please. You're worthy, and you're a badass. Everybody who's listening is a badass. And I want to thank you for just, for being on this journey with me. I'll be checking into the facility tomorrow, depending on when I can release the episode. It will be Wednesday, October 18th. And yeah, take care of yourselves, radicals. I love you all very much. See you around.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.